Nikki, are you there?
Yes,
you
I'm
ready?
here and I'm ready.
Should we start, or would you like to stick to the time?
No, I'm happy to start if everybody's happy to continue now.
Okay, great. So we'll begin.
Okay.
You just set it up, I'll do the introduction.
Okay.
I know she will share. Yeah. Nikki, can you share, or should we share? Oh, she's sharing. Okay.
Already. Okay, so now we invite Dr. Mohammed Askan to chair the next session.
Thank you, Chef Sevin. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's a pleasure and honor to actually introduce Professor Nicola Mulder as our first keynote speaker for the event. So I'm just going to quickly read bio sketch, and then she can share what she has in store for you. So Prof. Nicola Mulder heads the Computational Biology Division at the University of Cape Town, or UCT in short, and is a full member of the Institute of Infectious Diseases and Molecular Medicine. She leads H3A BioNet, which was mentioned by Cecilia earlier. This is a Pan-African bioinformatics network of 28 institutions in 17 countries, which is developing bioinformatics capacity to enable genomic data analysis through an extensive training program for African researchers. She has also she also co-leads a sickle cell disease data coordination center and a Wellcome Trust Center data integration platform at UCT, and is PI of the new DSI Africa Open Data Science platform. She received her PhD in medical microbiology from the University of Cape Town, and then worked for 8.5 years, so 8.5 years, at the European Bioinformatics Institute in Cambridge as a team leader. At UCT, her research focuses on genetic determinants of susceptibility to diseases, African genome variation, and microbial genomics and infectious diseases from both the host and pathogen perspectives. Her group provides bioinformatics services and training and develops new algorithms and resources for the analysis of complex African genetic data. Prof. Mulder is actively involved in capacity development, including training, education, and curriculum development in bioinformatics. She also sits on a number of international scientific advisory boards. All right, with that, I welcome Prof. Nicola Mulder to begin her talk. Thank you. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak today, for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about global activities in bioinformatics training and education. So I'll talk a bit about some of the challenges, which I'm sure many of you know about, how we are trying to address these challenges through a big community that we currently just call Education Summits. And then I'm going to talk a bit about how we've applied those in some of our own settings, so 2 projects, H3A BioNet and the NGS Academy, and then some of the other resources, trainer resources that we've been developing. So I think we all know that there are a number of challenges when you are a trainer. So the first is when you're trying to set up a training program is finding qualified trainers. So a trainer needs to be knowledgeable in the domain area or the topic that they're training in, but also how to train. So very few people, very few academics learn formally how to design courses, how to develop training materials, and how to deliver those courses and assess students adequately. The other challenge is developing training materials. This takes a lot of time. You have to keep this up to date all the time. We're often teaching a mixed audience, so people come in from different backgrounds. We have to keep the audience engaged. We have to be able to assess that skills that you wanted to teach to the students actually were imparted during your course. And of course, recently we've had to deal with going virtual. So if we look at specifically bioinformatics training, I think the biggest problem is the huge demand. I mean, particularly in Africa, but I think across the world, for people who need bioinformatics skills. And it's not just people who want to be bioinformaticians. It's people who are clinicians, people who are basic scientists. So it's a big audience that we're dealing with. who come in with different kind of starting points and need different endpoints. They need to know things at different levels, depending on whether they're going to really develop software and analyze and apply that, or just run a few point and click programs. So we need to think about, you know, what the audiences need at the end of the day. And often additional competencies are required. So you can't just teach information like biochemistry, here's some information, some facts about biology. You actually need some skills. So you need a bit of programming, maybe a bit of Linux or Unix, statistics. So there's some foundational skills that also need to come along with bioinformatics training. And also with bioinformatics, like other computational training, you have theory, but then you also have hands-on practice. And that hands-on practice is very obviously, you know, hands-on on the computer as opposed to laboratory hands-on. So it's a different approach. And the other thing is that because bioinformatics education hasn't really been a traditional track in undergraduate education, it's very seldom that people will have come in with a bioinformatics education, standard bioinformatics education. So the audience, again, has even more heterogeneity. So there are a number of global efforts to address these challenges. And Goblet, which Celia's been talking about, is obviously, you know, one major effort that's looking at supporting trainers. So these are just some of the challenges that are listed there. And so some of the solutions we've been looking at, so when we're looking at the problem of audiences being different and how do you assess competencies and skills gain, we put a lot of effort into developing and using competencies in bioinformatics. When it comes to the high demand for training, we've also thought about how we can extend the training and get a far greater reach. And this would be using different training modalities, such as, you know, going online. When it comes to the challenge of trainers, how do you have really good trainers who know the topic and know how to train and, you know, manage to keep audiences engaged, etc. We have been looking at a particular a trainer program to build trainer skills. And then the other sets of challenges include constantly updating training materials, having access to training materials, thinking about different bioinformatics topics, etc. And for this, we've been working on a trainer portal. So a lot of this activity is being done through a community that has been developed through a series of meetings, or what we call education summits. So the aim of these summits is to bring together bioinformatics trainers and educators. So it's got nothing to do with the trainees themselves. It's not to learn bioinformatics. It's to learn and engage and communicate and share ideas about challenges and solutions for bioinformatics training and education. So this is helping to drive the development of standards, guidelines, and the resources globally for people who are doing bioinformatics training and education. So the first summit was the one and only face-to-face version we've had of this, and that was in 2019. So HJ Bionet hosted that in Cape Town. And then this was followed by every year around May, virtual summits hosted by EBI in 2020, Cabana in Latin America in 2021, and then AP Bionet in Asia in 2022. So this is just a photograph from us in Cape Town, where we could have a face-to-face photograph. And it's been organized by a number of different organizations. You can see some of the logos at the bottom there. And Goblet obviously has played, you know, a big role in that too. So the format of these summits is very different to a conference. It's not about sitting listening to talks and minimal presentations, only when we need to. It's all about discussing, sharing, and these major breakout sessions. So these are the breakout sessions we had in Cape Town. Obviously, the virtual ones were virtual breakout sessions. The idea was to build resources. So these are the sets of projects that the Education Summit group has been working on. And I'll go through some of these in a bit more detail. So the first one is, you know, obviously addressing the challenges that I've mentioned before, and that is competencies. So competency is basically something you need to be able to do your job. So if you have a particular set of tasks that you need to do, you need some competencies. You need knowledge about those tasks, or you need specific skills to accomplish the tasks to be able to do your job well. And so based on a particular persona or a job description, you have a set of competencies. And so competency comes with a set of knowledge, so that you need to know something about the area that you're working in. You need to have a skill to carry out the task. And then you also need to have certain attitudes to do this in an appropriate way. So in order to develop competencies, the first thing to do is to define the audience or the persona. So for the ISCB competency, so ISCB has been developing competencies for many years and just sort of releasing the third version of these. So we started off with 3 users, bioinformatics scientists, and bioinformatics engineers. Those were the 3 persona, and then realized that actually within those, there are a number of different sort of nuances of different types of audience. And so we then further split this. So we've got a number of different persona. So this would be your audience type of who's your target audience that you're trying to build a competency in. The next thing to do is actually to define the competencies. So as I said, we've been developing these for years, and this is the third version. So we have sort of high level areas like, general bioscience information, data science skills, computer science related skills, and then professional conduct. So how do you, manage collaborations? How do you manage working with people, etc. And so for each of these, we have a list of competencies. And so these are some examples here, like for, biosciences, you need to be able to work in depth in at least one technical area. So for example, if you are working on microbiomes, then you need to know about what is a microbiome, what are the workflows, what are the tools that are used for analyzing microbiome data. The next thing is, once you've got a sort of a list of competencies, is then to define the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So for each of those competencies in the ISCB list, we then sort of split out and built up this set of knowledge that you need, the skills that you need, and effective attitudes. So we actually divided these into positive attitudes and negative attitudes, what you shouldn't do, as well as what you should do. So it just fleshes out these competencies. So you have a better idea of what are the individual components of the competencies. And then the next step is then to determine for each of those persona that you've identified, and for each competency, what level do they need that competency? So for ISCB, we ended up using the Bloom's taxonomy, which basically is a list of about 5 or 6 terms that try to show the level, how much depth do you need in terms of the competency? Do you just need knowledge of something, or do you need to really have comprehension, be able to evaluate, assess, drive the field in that particular competency? And so through this process, we've developed competencies for the ISCB, and these are available. The EBI has a competency hub that has a number of different competencies from different areas of the life sciences, and you can see the ISCB one is there. And one of the applications of this is that you can have these different persona, like Martha, who's a bioinformatics researcher, who can come in and say what their background is, and then actually identify what competencies they need, to become a, full-on bioinformatician, for example. So how do we use the competencies? So there are 2 sort of main ways or main purposes of the competencies. One is to design a new course. And so this would be where, you define your course objectives and learning outcomes, and that helps you to identify what competencies you need. So then you refer to the ISCB competency list and say, well, my course is designed to provide the following competencies. That will then tell you what knowledge you need to include in your content, and what skills you need to include perhaps in your practical sessions. You also need to define the level at which each of your courses, your persona need that. So for example, if you're designing a course, it's usually for a particular audience. It's an introductory, so it's a beginner audience, or it's an advanced course, so there must be, very competent bioinformaticians. And then you add the proposed kind of the competency list, and then the content, and then you make sure that if there are any overlaps, because sometimes different modules might give you the same knowledge or the skills, and then you remove redundancy, and then that's a way to flesh out your curriculum. So many people are now using these actually to map competencies to an existing course, to check that, number one, that the course has been designed properly, but then also to think about whether they have any gaps in terms of the content or how they're evaluating courses. So for degree programs, you can put out all the modules in your degree. You can put out the competencies you wanted them to get from that particular module. Map that to the knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and then check if there were any gaps, and then you can fill those gaps with additional content. The same for courses, but it's on a smaller level because it's an individual course. So in this way, it's a way to kind of sanity check your courses that are existing to make sure that they are going to impart the necessary competencies, and then have a good way to assess those. So how do you assess that a competency has been achieved? That's an important sort of outcome of a course. So the IACB is also, and the Education Summit Group has also provided a guidelines document which talks about what is a competency, describes the IACB competencies, and describes how you would map competencies to a course, or how you would use the competencies to design a new course. So just some applications of how we've applied the competency specifically into the projects that I'm going to talk about. So Bionet, as has been mentioned, this is this Pan-African Bioinformatics Network for East Africa, and it's been building capacity in bioinformatics across the continent for 10 years now. So there have been extensive training programs. So we use competencies both to, in the first instance, to map to existing courses, but now when we design any new course, we base it on the competencies. So we use those competencies to actually design, the learning outcomes and develop the course content. And then for the NGS Academy, so this it's basically a project that spun out of Bionet. It's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we funded to build a training program for the use of NGS for pathogen surveillance in the Africa Center for Disease Control Pathogen Genomics Initiative. So Africa CDC has these PGIs, these pathogenomics institutes around Africa that are developed to implement NGS for pathogen routine and emerging pathogen surveillance for African countries. So we've been designing helping them to design their courses and run some online courses. And so for this, we've been developing a recommended curriculum. So if you look in, normally we work in the academic space, and now we're working here in the public health institutes where it's not academics, they define staff with defined positions. So you might have a set of staff in your public health institute. Each of those has a set of job descriptions. For each of those tasks that they need to complete, they will need a particular set of competencies. And then, of course, each competency will have a set of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And then from that, we've been able to think about, well, what content do they need? What modules do they need in order to be able to gain those skills? And then we've gone a step further and we're now looking at what existing courses are there, where maybe there's some online courses that already give those skills. If there aren't any existing courses, we can identify, where we need to create new courses. Sometimes in Africa, where the resources are really low and you don't have, sometimes it's the wet lab person who's doing everything from the wet lab to the bioinformatics to the interpretation. And then, they would need competencies across both of those sets. So it depends, people can sort of pick and choose. So we've built a curriculum, a recommended curriculum based on existing content, from courses and competencies required. So we have generic viral pathogen viral surveillance, bacterial surveillance, bioinformatics for specifically the bioinformaticians in this public health institutes. We've got a fungal one, malaria, etc. And then within each of these, a pathogen specific one like SARS or TB, for example. So these are now being sort of mapped to the competencies. So for the competencies, we've been looking at job descriptions, job adverts, for example, as well as existing competency frameworks from the EBI Competency Hub, because there are quite a few competencies that exist. And of course, with bioinformatics, these will overlap significantly with the IACB ones. So how do we plan to use this? So if we think about a public health institute and the staff that they have, we've got a set of foundational skills and we've got a set of applied skills. So foundational skills will be, the basic things that people need to know, or the skills they need to have. And then the applied skills will be depending on whether they have working on viral pathogens or bacterial pathogens. And then there might be additional applied skills based on, whether it's SARS specifically or TB or specifically. So we can then look at the bioinformatics scientists and say, well, they have a set of foundational skills that they need. And so those will be attached to a certain set of modules. And then they have these, if they're working specifically on SARS, then they will need, specific set of modules. And then those will have a link to those modules. So it's a way for new public health institutes to come in and think about for each staff member what they need and therefore what competencies they're going to end up with. So that's just one of the applications we've been using. For example, if it's wet lab, then you have another set of foundational skills and a different set. And these might be at a different level in terms of beginner, intermediate, advanced. So that's the competencies and how we've been using them. So another project that the Education Summits have been looking at is course endorsement. So ICB started getting a lot of requests for how do I know that my course is, a bona fide, bioinformatics course, and I want to prove that it's, endorsed and accredited by ICB. So the group developed this process for endorsement of courses and degree programs. So I'm not going to talk about them in detail. So Russell Schwartz and Bruno Goethe were involved in that. The process is available now, and so you can go to the ICB web pages. And so you basically fill in a form that gives you all the information either about your degree program or about your course, and then that gets evaluated by an ICB panel, and then you get your little sort of endorsement from ICB, and that just proves that your course sort of is high quality, considered to be, a really good quality bioinformatics course. Then the next thing I'm going to talk about is train the trainer. And the idea here is to think about how we can impart skills on how to develop and deliver training. So we've been talking for years about developing an online train the trainer course. Welcome Connecting Scientists, put out a MOOC. EBI and other groups have been doing this kind of training, but we wanted this sort of global online training course. And so these education summits, we've been looking at putting together a curriculum for this. It covers, major things about planning courses, communication, engagement with trainers, etc. And we finally got to a point where the first course is going to run next month. So the advert just went out yesterday. This is on the right. You can see the flyer for that course. And so this course is basically going to run for 3 weeks. So the first week is talking about training theory and practical aspects of building a training program. The second week looks at training design elements, and then the third week looks at evaluation. So that's assessment of your participants, that they've got the skills or the knowledge that you wanted them to gain, but also evaluation of the courses, and how do you get feedback, and how does that affect your course design. So this course is purely for trainers. It's not for trainees who want to learn about bioinformatics. You won't learn about bioinformatics here. You'll learn about how to design training courses. And the hope is that we bring communities together. So we'll have different breakout classrooms with facilitators. We'll try to group people by topic. So for example, if we're going to build trainers in pathogen surveillance, then they will go into one classroom so that they design courses together and hopefully eventually build curricula and actual content together and build this community. So in H3Bionet, we've been trying to, think about train the trainer throughout. So we've been from day one, when we had our first courses in year one, 10 years ago, we had to have quite a few international trainers. And then we decided this has got to change. We've got to build our own faculty. And so we've been building trainers over time by doing a number of things. One is having these dedicated train the trainer courses that we've been working with EBI on. But the other was to start building faculty from people who attended the courses. On the next year, they became teaching assistants, and then they sort of progress up towards being trainers because they know that content very well. They've seen the scenario, they've been in the environment where other people have been teaching, they've learned from that, and then they become trainers. And that's been very successful in building a cadre of trainers. We've also been building train the trainer web resources. So we've got a project that's building a web resource for finding, helping to build content for lecturers, for example. And then we have a specific software and data carpentries train the trainer project. So we've been working with the data and software carpentries who have their own train the trainer program to specifically build software and data carpentry trainers across Africa. And so they've been running these carpentry instructor courses. They've been attending these and then also running their own courses and contributing to the content. So we now have, through some of these train the trainer programs, we've now got carpentries trainers spread across the continent, and these groups are now responsible for rolling out carpentries training in their regions. So this is one way we try to address the demand, that we're not always from central H3Bionet trying to manage all these courses and run all these courses. And we actually distribute this, and we have regional training hubs and regional training instructors that are able to take on the role of organizing and running their own courses. And this is far more kind of relevant for sustainability. So that's the train the trainer. So the other activities we started in some of the later summits was, especially when COVID came along, was going virtual because we all suddenly had to deal with this. But then also we had a sort of some breakout groups starting projects looking at training in LMICs. So the Going Virtual project was looking at tools for delivery. So how do you have novel ways of delivering training when everything is online? How do you keep audiences engaged? How do you assess how things are going in the classroom when you're not physically in the classroom and you can't see people's faces? And then how do you make sure all the training materials are fair and available? And then the training in LMICs, some of the projects in there have been guidelines for training in LMICs, building the infrastructure. How do we deal with language barriers? How do we address equity, diversity, and inclusion? And how do we include sort of broader areas across LMICs where the resources are very limited? So to talk about some of those, I'm going to talk about our experiences in H3ABINET. So we have in H3ABINET, we have quite a big training ecosystem. So, in addition to all the other stuff we have to do, the training program has been kind of the biggest component. So we have a set of different audiences that we've been having to address. So obviously, the building the trainers, which I've talked about, the users, the scientists, the engineers, the sysadmin. So we've had to train a huge range of audiences. Each of those has been trained through different modalities. So face-to-face, internships, train the trainer, hackathons, or a mixed model approach. And then we also have this kind of ecosystem where we're trying to build communities from our training, we're building training resources, etc. So the Going Virtual part comes into here where we suddenly couldn't run these face-to-face courses or face-to-face hackathons. Everything had to suddenly go online. So we looked at, actually this was prior to COVID, we looked at what are the pros and cons of these different training modalities. So online teaching is cost efficient, it doesn't cost us anything. It reaches a very large audience and it's very easy to share material because we have all these now online facilities for sharing and teaching. The problems are the challenges in fostering a sense of community. So it's hard to feel like you're in the same boat as somebody else when you're sitting at home on your computer and everybody else is sitting in their own homes, as opposed to the classroom feeling and the kind of rapport and things that you get within a face-to-face classroom. This is a challenge to form collaborations because I find when I'm at a course or an event or a conference, those connections form when I'm in the coffee queue or having lunch, not when I'm in the classroom, in a session. The other, so that's with the online teaching. Then with the live kind of face-to-face workshops, the pros are it's dedicated time. So you're in one place, you have this close interaction where you can have, this great networking opportunity. The cons are it's costly. So we used to cost us between $40,000 and $50,000 for each course because we had to fly people in. Flying people around Africa is very expensive. There's visas, there's flights, there's accommodation costs, all sorts of things, and therefore it's a very limited audience. So 20, 30 people at a maximum. Hackathons are great. You have a defined outcome. And our hackathons are either to develop code or to analyze data sets. And you have a very mixed audience, so it's great. The problem, some of the challenges with hackathons is having some, base knowledge that everyone requires, getting the right participants in the room and making sure that there's a lot of prep work before a hackathon. But we've also managed to successfully run some online hackathons. So when we polled people in the consortium, what mode would they like, to have when it comes to training, many of them, so the bottom one here is face-to-face, that is generally the most popular, but it also differed by audience. So developers were quite happy to do their own online training. Students tended to go for more sort of one-on-one internships and things. So this gave us some idea that actually there's no optimal mode in terms of face-to-face versus online versus hackathon versus internship as to what is the best. It's quite varied, it's quite a personal choice. Learning styles differ and it depends on the background and I think the content. But I think we've still learned that while we've survived for 2 years going on online, just in the last few months, having some live events has just made me realize how much value we still get out of those face-to-face sessions. But what we had to do when COVID came along was actually we did this before COVID because we had to get the biggest, big demand was a distributed classroom model. So in this model, we first started with basically having classrooms around Africa, but these were physical classrooms. So we had classrooms like up to 30, 40 classrooms across the continent who met physically, and then they all joined together virtually at the same time. So they ran over sort of between 2 and 4 months, once or twice a week for 3 hours per contact session, where everybody was joined live together and some people were physically in a classroom. When COVID came along, we then had to make those physical classrooms virtual classrooms. We then used video conferencing and a course management system. We ended up managing to run these services where we had face-to-face classrooms. And so they would sit and then they'd be joined online to all the other classrooms, and there'd be networking between the classrooms. And then in the content management system, then people would be able to ask questions. So we'd have live sessions with the audience. They'd be able to download a pre-recorded lecture so that if they had internet challenges, they'd have the downloaded version, they'd watch the video, and then they all join online with the live lecturer, and the lecturer answers questions and they go through practicals, for example. But then everybody could ask questions on the content management system afterwards. And sometimes it was the people from other classrooms that answered the questions. So it just sort of built this community all around this particular topic area. So we successfully ran this we started it with an introduction to bioinformatics, which was, very much point and click, just using web interfaces. And there, I keep thinking we should by now have taught everybody who needs bioinformatics in Africa, but every year we still have 3,000-4,000 applications for this course. So we managed to reach an audience of over 1,000, usually about 1,400 per year. Then we moved to intermediate courses. This became more complicated because you had to download and run workflows. And so we built containerized workflows. So you needed to have far more sysadmin support and far more technical support and computational resources to actually run these intermediate courses. And so these we ended up having much fewer participants, but still managing to have multiple classrooms. So 300 to 400 versus 20 or 25 if you were doing it face-to-face. And then we've also run it with genomic medicine course, where we've had different audiences, doctors, so clinicians, nurses, and pathologists in separate rooms. So that has enabled us to really think about, it's given us a lot of experience about going virtual and how you manage the technical side of things, how you manage the engagement with audiences. And we've tried all sorts of things to help with, increasing the experience and improving the experience for the trainee themselves. Another way we're trying to sort of increase impact is by making our training materials available, because we get 3,000 applications. If we accept 1.5 or 1,000, there's still over 1,000 people who really wanted the course who didn't get it. So we always make sure that all those materials are completely findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if you didn't get to go on the course, you can go and try and follow the course on your own, just using the materials. So in order to make everything fair, we use bioschemas. I'll explain a bit what that is a bit later. We curate the training materials and make them findable and make them accessible. In order to make them interoperable, we map them to either EDAM ontology, which is basically a list of terms to say what kind of content it is in terms of bioinformatics terms. And then we also make sure we have an accessible license so people know what they can use or how they can reuse the materials. And then we put them all on YouTube, GitHub, and we make them searchable on TESS. So for curating our training materials, so we basically will design a course. We'll fill in a kind of a template to say this is what the course is all about. This is the structure of the course. And then once the course has run, we then fill that structure in with the links to all the training materials. They're properly curated, so they're mapped to these ontologies. All information, metadata around the course and the course materials is on there. And then those go onto a particular site. Now, in order to do this sort of in a standardized way that it's the same as everybody else around the world should be doing, and it's findable by sort of web scraping resources, we use bioschemas. So bioschemas is kind of a component of the schema.org, which is a big kind of worldwide wide web initiative to think about standardizing metadata and data around things to make things more searchable online. So bioschemas particularly is looking at the biological components of that. And so the kinds of things you have, and then within bioschemas, there's training. So you have a course instance, you have the course information itself, and then you have things about the training materials. So for each of those, you will then have standard template with standard fields that you need to have information about. So if it's a location, if it's about the course instance, you need to know what is the course name, where is it located, when is it running, who's it for, what's the intended audience, all the information about the course instance. And then the course itself will have the list of topics and all sorts of things. So and then each of those is either a minimum, as in you have to, it's sort of essential to have this, or it's recommended. So you can have minimum or core elements that you include to describe your course and the metadata around your course. So we're using this bioschemas basically to create a web-based template. So when somebody wants to say, okay, I'm going to develop a course, there's a template that's bioschemas compliant that they just fill in the information, right? This is the course title, this is when I'm going to run it, this is who the audience is, these are the topics, these are the learning objectives, etc. So it sort of guides you through how to design the course because it's got those fields that you need to fill in. And then because it's all sort of compliant, we then have, we just then pull in the training materials after that. And then it's much easier to find information about the course and about the training materials. So we've been running courses for 10 years. People often go back and say, oh, I really wanted to know about this. We say, well, we run this course, you can go find the materials here. So the information about our past courses is all on our website under these accordions. And then we have upcoming training. So what we've done is, because it's hard to actually store the course materials themselves in this sort of website, we actually then have them on Figshare. So at UCT, we have Ziva Hub, which is our version of Figshare. So we put the course materials there with all the information about the course. If the video is available, we often just store that on YouTube and we link to that. And then each course material and each course gets a DOI, digital object identifier, so that it's citable. So the trainers can put it on their CV as a citable kind of output, and then it's also findable. And so this way we are trying to make our materials available and open to anybody and as accessible as possible, particularly for those people who didn't get to come on the courses. We do the same for the NGS Academy. So all our training, we have this course page that has all the information, has the course schedule. And then as soon as the course is run, that is then hyperlinked directly to the training materials for that, either on Figshare or on GitHub. Okay, so that's talking a little bit about going virtual and training in LMIC. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the Education Summit outputs is general training resources. So the group has been, at each of the summits, been looking at a set of resources that will be useful for trainers themselves. So these include, if you think about the whole process of, okay, I'm a trainer, I need some training skills, I need to design a course, so I need some resources for that. Once I've designed my course, obviously the course includes things like, the course logistics. How do I set up the course logistics? How do I budget for, what it's going to cost for the venue and the audio visual, etc. How do I advertise the course? Once I've got all of the course information, now I've got to create the course materials. The course might be associated with specific software. Do I package that in a VM? Do I put it into a container? Do I just make it available on a memory stick? And then once the course is run, you want to then make the materials fair. You want to be able to assess the trainees. You want to be able to assess what the trainees to evaluate the course, etc. So there's a whole lot of different components of things that are useful for somebody who's basically a trainer who is designing and running and delivering training courses. So in order to design courses, obviously we have the competencies and the guides, so that's part of the trainer portal. We have, for the training skills, we've got the Train the Trainer program. This has all been gathered again in this trainer portal. And then other information, so useful things like logistics, creating course materials, the FAIR project. So we've got a whole FAIR project now in the education summits. This is all available in the trainer portal. So these are, and we also provide a list of example assessments and course evaluation. So, if people want to just have a simple form for evaluating, getting feedback on their course, there's some example forms there rather than reinvent the wheel and try to think up the questions yourself. So these are all available now on the Goblet pages. So this is the link. This is what it looks like. So you can't see because it's too small, but basically it's a page that has a list of all kind of the everything we've collected. So this information's been available all over the place, but what we've done here is just pull it into a single place under that sort of workflow that I've just shown. So each of these can be expanded. So how do I design and develop course materials? And then that expands, and then it has a link to a whole lot of documents, guidelines, or papers. There are a lot of 10 simple rules papers about training, for example. And so we try to provide resources around these. So that's, I think, a really useful resource. And then some of the additional resources that we've been developing in NGS Academy for a start is when we started running these courses in different African institutions, we found that when the trainer leaves, the people are kind of there alone. So if you included the software like the VM and that on your course, and they had to install it at their own place to run it for the course, then of course they've got that afterwards. If they didn't have that, if you waltzed in, gave the course and will start with everything else, then they're kind of left without the environment that they need to continue in the same with the same resources they would have had during the course. We also find that they don't have anybody to ask questions of later. The trainers move on to other things. Sometimes when we want to run a course, people say, I need a malaria course. We've got to go find the trainers. We've got to find who's suitable. Is there anybody in the area who speaks the right language, who can run this course? So we've had a lot of requests from our trainees for long-term support and for mentorship. So how do we support them immediately after and 6 months after and a year after the course is run so that they can actually implement the skills? So one of the things we've been doing is developing a trainer database. So this is number one, to help us find trainers, but also to find a set of people who could answer questions. So our trainer database, basically you come in as a trainer, you register, you put in your information, and this is all names and things are kept completely private. So you become a number, so we protect private information here. And then you can fill in for particular topic areas what training experience you have. So for this is all about pathogen surveillance. So they do viral pathogen surveillance. They have 2 years experience in teaching on that. They have 3 years experience in teaching on that, or whatever. So you can fill in a list of areas of expertise you have and the number of years training experience you have in that. And then you end up with a profile for each trainer. And as I say, this is anonymized such that, if people come in and ask you questions, you don't have your name exposed unless you wanted to. So we have this database of trainers, and then we've now attached this to a help desk for trainees. So basically a trainee will come and they will say, oh, I've been doing some NGS on SARS, but I don't know how to run this pipeline. They can choose a category and then they can fill in a question about that particular category. The help desk then goes and triggers an email to any of the trainers who had registered, who put that category as one of the areas of expertise, and it sends the question to them. Then it has a little chat box thing where those trainers can all talk to each other and say, oh, I got this one, or can you answer this, or whatever. And then they can look at the questions and actually answer the questions, and then that gets back to the user. When they've answered the question, they can also choose to say, well, let's add this to the knowledge base, such that when anybody else wants to come in and say, oh, I've got a question on, software containerization and workflows, these are the tickets that have already been answered. Let me see if my question's already been answered. And so it's a way of kind of having long-term support. We're hoping that eventually, some people will connect to the specific trainers, and they'll build up sort of a relationship, and hopefully then go offline and have more of a long-term mentorship. But at least in the short term, anybody who's been one of our trainees can ask any question, and hopefully there'll be a pack of people behind the help desk to be able to answer that question. And then also we can come in, and if you're looking for a trainer in software and containerization, you can find anybody who chose that category and then contact them through this rather than through the email, because you won't have access to the email, and then they can sort of email you back and then set up a discussion about setting up training. So that's something we've just about to release, and we hope that's going to be useful. And then in H3 Bionet, we've also built up some other resources like a training guide. We've built up, Verena's built up this training support pack that's got templates for setting up courses, for the logistics, for the planning, for timelines, for emails to rejected people, to emails for successful applications, like anything you can think of, every sort of piece along the puzzle of designing and running a course. We've got a sort of a template or a pack, information or something for that in here, including REDCap templates for course evaluations and everything. So that's all available for download, and anybody can use this. We also had questions of like, okay, I'm in Algeria, I'm in an institution, we have no bioinformatics at all. How do I start from scratch? And so we developed a guidelines document on how one would actually start bioinformatics from scratch when you have nothing at your institution. So we've got a big guidelines document for that, which we put on our website. And we also built a 10 simple rules paper for that, which just summarizes some of that. So these resources are all ways that we're trying to support the trainer community, and also in some ways the trainee community. But as I said, a lot of this work has been done together with the Education Summit groups. So I'd like to acknowledge those people. The Education Summit community is quite big, and we get added to every year as we host in a different sort of region of the world. We get new members, and it's wonderful. We meet once a month. We go through these projects and the updates, and then we have this annual summit meeting. So the next one's hopefully going to be hosted by the Welcome Connecting Science in Cambridge. And then, so there's a huge community. I couldn't put all their names, but just to name some of the project leads within that. But as I said, it is a big community. So if your name's not on here, I do apologize. A lot of people have contributed to many of the things I've talked about. Also, I would like to acknowledge my training team in H3 Bionet and the NGS Academy, and funding for those that's helped us to sort of implement and test some of these resources that the Education Summit's been developing. So with that, I'd like to end, and I'm open to questions. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Nikki. That was admirable, the amount of stuff that you guys have been doing. Okay, so we are open for questions on the floor on this side. And the chat, let me just check the chat. You can type your questions through the chat. I have a whole lot of questions for you. Okay. First of all, I think I'm very curious. Well, I've heard about H3 and Bionet a lot, and you know, I think this is probably the first time I'm really listening to all the things that you guys are doing. I'm curious, what is the operational model of H3 and Bionet? How are you able to do so much while the rest of us are still struggling to get ourselves organized? And I think you're doing this systematically. You are like the Apple, and the rest of us are like the Samsung. And we're just trying to figure out. So what is the secret behind your ecosystem? Please share with us.
So the first secret is money. So we have been very fortunate to be funded by the NIH for the last 10 years. And that's allowed us to do quite a lot, but it's not everything. I mean, we have done so much with very little. So as I say, all our courses are free, and a lot of that has been the time, the generous time that people have given. So we have, you know, our teaching assistants, they generously give up their time, but I think they also get something out of it because they learn how to moderate courses, how to facilitate courses. They actually build up their own skills. So I think it's also been the systematic way we've gone about it. So, you know, with the NGS Academy, for example, there's knee-jerk reaction. SARS happened, the COVID happened, we had to train very quickly in SARS, so you quickly develop courses. In H3 Bionet, we were there to develop courses and training and resources for Asia Africa. For the first year or two, Asia Africa was still trying to recruit people and get themselves up and running. So we had time to just sit down and say, right, let's think strategically. We need to build up everything. So we need to build up resources for bioinformatics, which means we need to train sysadmins. So let's go train them, because there's no point getting software and computing unless you know how to manage that. Then we looked at each sort of audience and thought about it, but we had to adapt. And so I think we didn't start with a whole bunch of really qualified trainers. We started with people who had vision and ideas, and who came from different places. So some of our training coordinators come from, Verena works on jellyfish. She wasn't a mathematician, but she came in with very different ideas because she also worked with the astronomy community. And so it's ideas of how to engage people. It's ideas of how to design things. It's ideas of how to make things, interesting and exciting. How we weren't afraid to challenge, the norm. So to test new things, if it failed, it failed, okay, so we wasted a few people's time for a few hours on a course, but we tried and we tested everything. So I think it was really sitting down and planning properly. And I think what the Education Summit helps you to do is it builds the guidelines. So the competencies, for example, it takes much longer to design a course if you're going through the whole route of competencies, but it means that ultimately your course is probably a much better quality because it's being designed properly and your students are going to get the best out of it. So it actually does pay to invest time in careful planning and thinking about strategically. So you think about, we also try and put ourselves in the shoes of the audience. So we don't just say, here's a generic course, everybody can take it. We think, well, a clinician doesn't have time to do this. They don't have time to sit for 5 days, all day, every day. But if we had, 2-hour sessions a day at a certain time, like lunchtime, they'd be able to jump out of their, clinical routine and do this. So we try to think about our audience very carefully and adapt to that audience, but then also plan with the resources we have, and then also give people opportunities. So build faculty over time by giving them the opportunity to teach, giving them the opportunity to be teaching assistants, to learn, with the people, and having this community, this global community, working with Goblet and all these, high quality international trainers. We have learned so much from each other. I think that's been, don't try and do this on your own. Everybody else around the world has the same challenges. So just pick up the phone and say, hey, how did you get over this one? And work with the community. I think those are some of the key points for success.
Admirable and exemplary. Thank you. And I think there's a lot for us at AP Bionet to learn from, and maybe you have a place for me to come over and observe for a week or a month. Moving on to the next question, I really liked the competency thing that you shared with us, and you started applying that to many of the courses. So could you share what was it like when you started mapping this competency to the courses before the competency existed, and then to courses that were designed based on the competency? Like, did you see a very nice mapping before for those that were designed before, and for those that were designed after? Was it easy or hard to try to adopt those competency requirements?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the competencies are quite high level, and so it's reasonably easy to map them to existing courses, because obviously you're mapping to things that exist. Trying to design a course from the competency, it's much easier if you had some indicative content. So if each competency said, okay, you need knowledge in a particular biological area of sciences, well, yes, you need knowledge, say, in microbiomes, but what knowledge in microbiomes? So you still need to do quite a lot of, still need to put in quite a lot of efforts in terms of, designing the content. So I think mapping existing courses to competencies was much easier for us, and that mapped reasonably well. What we do find with competencies is often quite personal. So if when we were designing the competencies for the genomic medicine, for example, we found some persona nurses, we put people in a room and said, right, what level does this nurse need to know this at? And each person in the room had some different level. They had a different idea. When we were mapping the ISCB competencies to the Bloom's taxonomy, we all also had different ideas ranging right across that spectrum of the 6 or 7 Bloom's things. So I think the context information is very important. So there isn't a one size fits all. You also need to think about the context. But I think you can get a better course if you design it first by working out what the competency is. Because when you go back and mapping it, at that point it's almost too late to change it. And adapt your course. And there's a bit of resistance to doing that because you've already got your course content and everything. So I think designing it with those competencies in mind is probably is technically the better way to go.
I just want to remind our audience, especially for those of our friends from Turkey, as far as I understand, we don't have an undergrad program in bioinformatics. Am I right? Yes, there's none. We do have, I think, postgrad, and I think some of the professors are here. So there is this competency available, and I think there's this endorsement offer from ISCB that we can put a request for ISCB to look at our program and endorse. And I hope that becomes a seed or starting point for maybe offering undergrad programs in bioinformatics in the near future. Honor, would you want to comment on something on this?
Regarding the undergraduate program, I think there was one program. Regarding the undergraduate program, I think we have one program for bioinformatics and genetics. It's unfortunately not active. It's not actively admitting students. So we can say that currently we're not teaching bioinformatics directly from the undergrad. We have several graduate programs, including one at the Technical University, our university. But then I also think that bioinformatics and related disciplines are taught in a wider area. It could be a part of a biology graduate program, or it could be a part of biochemistry program. It's even part of biostatistics program. So we are kind of scattered, and we are not really offering focused education that likely gives students titles that say bioinformatics, masters in bioinformatics, and stuff like that. We have informal workshops, but I can also say that we do not have an organization such as the organization and Professor Mulder talked about. So we also need such a wide organization focused on kind of trainings that can be organized or planned, sort of like modules, so that people can decide whether they need it. Right now, I think there's much to do in that direction. Thank you, Professor Mulder. It was really nice talk. It was really nice to hear about your experience. I think we have a lot to learn about this as well.
All right, thank you, Anur. I have one more question if there's time. Oh, we are out of time. Okay, Nikki, I'm out of time. All right, so I will catch up with you through some other avenue, but thank you so much for your keynote talk. It was really wonderful. Please join me for a round of applause for Professor Nikki Mulder. Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Dr. Aspen. Thank you, Dr. Nicola. Now we will have a 5 minutes break before